Hello. You're on the Storm to Truth channel. Enjoy your watching. I never thought I'd be the guy writing this, but life has a funny way of humbling me. My name is John, 36 years old, married to a gorgeous blonde named Emily, who's 34. We've been together for 10 years, married for 7, and I always thought we had a solid relationship. I work as a software engineer, and she's a project manager for a marketing firm. We've always supported each other's careers, which made us the power couple to our friends. Or so I thought. Emily is stunning, tall, blonde hair that falls perfectly over her shoulders, piercing blue eyes that could stop traffic. She's always had attention from men, but I never worried about it. I trusted her. After all, isn't that what marriage is about? Trust? For the past year, she became close friends with one of her colleagues, Mark. He's a marketing strategist in the same firm. At first, I didn't mind. Mark was just her friend, and she'd talk about how he helped her with some stressful projects. They'd even grab coffee or lunch together. It was harmless. I mean, why would I be jealous of a friendship? Emily always said I was too serious, too focused on work, so I thought maybe Mark brought some balance into her life. But looking back now, the signs were there. It started small. She'd come home late from work more often, saying there was a big campaign they were working on. She'd laugh while texting, but when I'd ask who it was, she'd just say, "Oh, it's just Mark, we're talking about work." I didn't think twice about it. After all, I'd always been the kind of guy who respected her privacy. But things started to shift. She wasn't as affectionate as before. Our conversations felt forced, and she became more guarded with her phone, always keeping it face down or in her pocket. I told myself it was just work stress. I figured we'd get through it like we always did. I was wrong. I try not to think too much about the changes, brushing them off as just a rough patch. Every couple goes through those, right? But the distance between Emily and me kept growing. It wasn't just the late nights anymore, it was everything. She seemed more distracted at home, always checking her phone or zoning out during dinner. Our weekends, once filled with lazy mornings and long walks, became quiet, almost awkward. She'd say she had work to catch up on, and I'd take the hint, retreating to my own projects. Mark came up in conversation more often than I was comfortable with. At first, I thought it was just because they were spending so much time together on the campaign. I'd ask how her day went, and it always seemed to involve him. Mark came up with this amazing idea, or Mark helped fix this problem. It got to the point where I felt like I knew him better than my own wife. One night, we were supposed to go out for a rare date night. We hadn't spent quality time together in weeks, and I was really looking forward to it. But an hour before we were supposed to leave, Emily canceled. She said something came up at work, and Mark needed her help to finish a presentation. She apologized, but I could tell she wasn't really sorry. In fact, she seemed almost relieved to have an excuse. Can't Mark handle it on his own for one night? I asked, trying to keep my frustration in check. She looked at me, a little too quickly, with that rehearsed calmness. "John, it's just work. You know how demanding this job is. Don't make it into something it's not." Her words should have reassured me, but the more she said them, the more I felt like I was being fed the same excuse over and over again. I tried to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. I convinced myself that I was overthinking it. Emily had always been ambitious, and work had been a big part of her life even before Mark entered the picture. It made sense that she'd throw herself into it, especially with the pressure of managing a major campaign. But something about the way she talked about Mark, it didn't sit right with me. Later that week, I noticed she was spending more time getting ready in the mornings, even on days when I knew she didn't have meetings. Her outfits were more carefully chosen, her makeup a little more polished. When I asked if she had something special going on at work, she brushed it off with a laugh and said, "You know me, just trying to look professional." It seemed like an innocent answer, but it felt like something was missing, like she wasn't telling me the whole story. That was when the doubt started creeping in. The small, nagging voice in the back of my mind that whispered what I didn't want to believe. I shook it off, determined not to be that jealous, paranoid husband. I wasn't going to accuse her of something just because she was working hard. But the distance between us was undeniable, and it was getting harder to ignore. Still, I kept quiet. After all, she was my wife. I had to trust her, didn't I? The more I tried to ignore it, the more everything seemed to point in the same direction. Emily's behavior was becoming impossible to overlook, but I didn't want to believe that the woman I had loved for over a decade was betraying me. She was spending more time out of the house. Late-night work meetings became a regular thing. There was always some reason, some deadline or last-minute brainstorming session with Mark and the team. The more I heard his name, the more it ate away at me. One night, she told me she had to attend a weekend corporate retreat. I thought it was strange because she hadn't mentioned it until the last minute. "It's just the team, nothing big," she said, already packing her bag. "I'll be back Sunday night." I asked her where it was, and she casually replied, "Some resort out of town, not too far. You know how these work things go, lots of meetings, some team building, and I'll be stuck in boring conference rooms half the time." She laughed it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That weekend, I tried to keep myself busy. I hung out with friends, went for a long run, and even cleaned up the garage, but my mind kept drifting back to Emily. That nagging voice in my head kept asking, what if she's not really there for work? What if it's something else? By Sunday afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I texted her, asking how the retreat was going. She responded quickly, "So boring. I can't wait to get home to you." It sounded reassuring, but I noticed she didn't say much else. No details about the meetings, no mention of the team. A few hours later, Emily got home. She looked exhausted, but she was smiling. "You wouldn't believe how much they made us do," she said, flopping onto the couch. Team building exercises, lectures, it was nonstop. I didn't press her for details. I just watched her closely, trying to figure out if she was hiding something. I wanted to believe her, but something about the way she avoided eye contact when I asked her if everything was fine didn't sit right with me. A couple of days later, something happened that made my stomach drop. I was using Emily's laptop to check an email. Nothing out of the ordinary. But when I clicked on the browser, her messaging app popped up. Right there in plain sight were her messages with Mark. My heart pounded as I skimmed through them. Most of it was work-related, just casual conversations about projects and deadlines. But then I saw one message that made my blood run cold. "Mark, last weekend was amazing. Can't wait to do it again." What? Amazing? My hands shook as I scrolled further. Emily's response was just as bad. "Emily, it was perfect. I needed that escape so badly. Let's figure out the next trip soon." I felt like the floor had just disappeared beneath me. I stared at the screen, rereading those words, trying to make sense of them. The corporate retreat wasn't work-related at all. She had lied, and it was all there in front of me. The weekend wasn't about team building. It was about being with him. My chest tightened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. This was it. I had the confirmation I had been dreading. But part of me didn't want to believe it. Maybe there was another explanation. Maybe I was misinterpreting things. I closed the laptop and sat there in silence, my mind racing. The doubt was no longer creeping. It was screaming. The question now was, what was I going to do about it? I spent the next few days in a fog. The message exchange between Emily and Mark haunted me. Every time I looked at her, I felt sick. How could she do this? How long had it been going on? My mind kept racing through questions, but I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed to be sure. I needed more than just a few texts before I accused my wife of cheating. That's when I made a decision I never thought I would. I started checking her phone when she wasn't looking. It felt wrong, like I was violating her privacy, but I told myself it was the only way to know the truth. The problem was she was smart. Too smart. There were no incriminating messages, no photos, nothing. She either deleted them, or they were using another app that I couldn't access. I tried to keep my cool, but it wasn't easy. Every time she went out with friends, every time she mentioned another late-night meeting, I felt my blood boil. I wanted to scream at her, confront her, demand the truth. But I held back. I didn't want to be the crazy, paranoid husband without solid proof. Then about a week later, I got the break I needed. Emily had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. It buzzed, and I saw Mark's name flash on the screen. My heart raced as I grabbed the phone. I didn't have her password, but I could read the preview of the message. "Mark, can't stop thinking about last night. Miss you already." I froze, feeling my hands shake as the reality of it all sank in. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't work. This wasn't a close friendship. My wife was having an affair. Emily walked into the kitchen just as I put the phone down. She was wrapped in a towel, her hair still dripping. "What's up?" she asked, completely unaware that her entire secret had just unraveled in front of me. For a moment, I couldn't say anything. I just stood there, staring at her, trying to keep the rage from spilling out. "We need to talk," I finally said, my voice steady but cold. Her expression shifted, but she tried to play it cool. "What about?" I pointed to her phone on the counter. "Mark just texted you." Her face paled for a second, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, it's probably just about work." "No, it's not," I snapped, my voice rising. "He said he can't stop thinking about last night." "What is that supposed to mean?" "Emily." She froze, the color draining from her face completely. I saw a panic flash in her eyes, but she quickly tried to mask it. "John, I don't know what you think." "Don't lie to me," I interrupted, my voice louder now. "I saw the messages, Emily. I've seen enough to know something is going on between you two. How long has this been happening? How long have you been lying to me?" She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room like she was trying to figure out how to escape. "It's not what you think," she finally said, her voice trembling. We've just gotten close, but it's nothing serious. I didn't want to hurt you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind was spinning with anger and betrayal. "Nothing serious? You've been sneaking around behind my back, lying to me for God knows how long. And you're telling me it's nothing serious?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. She looked like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. She just stood there, staring at me, as if she was waiting for me to forgive her, to make everything okay. I wasn't going to let her off that easy. "You lied to me," I said, my voice cold. "You lied about that weekend retreat, didn't you? That wasn't for work. That was a trip with him." She opened her mouth to protest, but I could see the truth in her eyes before she even said anything. "John, please, I didn't mean for it to get this far. It just happened. I wasn't happy. We've been drifting apart for months, and Mark, he listened. He made me feel alive again." Her words cut deep. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. All the anger, all the pain came crashing down on me at once. "You weren't happy? So your solution was to run to another man? To betray everything we've built?" She sobbed, finally breaking down in front of me. "I didn't want to hurt you, I swear. I was confused. I didn't know how to fix things between us." I shook my head, backing away from her. "You've destroyed everything, Emily. Everything." She reached out for me, but I stepped back, the distance between us now feeling like a canyon. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "Please, we can fix it. I'll end it with Mark, I swear." But I wasn't sure there was anything left to fix. After the confrontation, the house felt different. The air was thick with tension, and the space that had once been filled with laughter and comfort now felt suffocating. Emily had retreated to the bedroom, tears streaming down her face, while I stood frozen in the living room, trying to process what had just happened. I couldn't think straight. My head was buzzing with anger, confusion, and disbelief. How did we get here? I had given everything to this marriage. My love, my trust, my support. I wasn't perfect, sure, but I had always been there for her. And in return, she had given herself to someone else. Someone who wasn't me. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever thought possible. It wasn't just about the physical act, though that was hard enough to stomach. It was the lies, the deceit, the emotional connection she had built with Mark behind my back. She didn't just cheat on me. She confided in him, shared things with him that I thought were only meant for us. That was what hurt the most. I couldn't stop replaying her words in my mind. He made me feel alive again. Those words echoed over and over like a broken record, each time cutting deeper than the last. Was I not enough for her? Had I somehow driven her into his arms? I wanted to scream, to punch something, to make the pain stop, but no matter what I did, it kept growing. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to walk out the door and never look back. But another part of me, the part that remembered all the good times, all the love we shared, was clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be fixed. Maybe we could get through this. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, with Emily on the other side of the bed. The silence between us was deafening. Neither of us spoke, and I wasn't sure I had anything left to say. I had already said everything, yelled everything. By morning, The reality of the situation had fully set in. There was no escaping it. I could feel Emily's eyes on me as I got out of bed, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. I didn't want to see the regret, the guilt, or the pain. I was drowning in my own. As I made my way to the kitchen, I could hear her following behind me. I braced myself for whatever conversation was coming next. "John," she started, her voice soft and hesitant. "We need to talk." I didn't answer right away. I poured myself a cup of coffee, letting the silence hang in the air. Finally, I turned to face her. "What's there left to talk about?" She stepped closer, wringing her hands nervously. "I meant what I said last night. I'll end it with Mark. I want to fix this. I love you." Her words should have meant something, but all I felt was numb. "You love me?" I repeated, my voice bitter. "You've been sneaking around with another man, lying to me for months, and now you're saying you love me?" "I do," she insisted, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I want to make it right. Please, John, give me a chance to fix this." I stared at her, trying to find some trace of the woman I had fallen in love with. But all I could see was the betrayal. "How can I trust you again, Emily? How do I know you won't run back to him the moment things get tough?" She wiped away her tears, shaking her head. "I won't. I swear. I'll do anything to make this right. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you to give us another chance." Her words hung in the air, and I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that she was truly sorry, that we could somehow rebuild what had been shattered. But another part of me knew that things would never be the same. The trust was gone. The foundation of our relationship had crumbled, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. "I don't know if I can do this," I said quietly. "I don't know if I can just move past this like nothing happened." Emily's face crumpled, and she took a step closer. "I'll go to counseling. We could go together. I'll cut off all contact with Mark. Whatever it takes, John, please. I can't lose you." I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw the fear in her eyes, the fear of losing everything. But was that enough to save us? Could I really forgive her? "I need time," I finally said. "I need to figure out what I want." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." I didn't respond. I just walked away, leaving her standing in the kitchen, alone with her regrets. I didn't know where this road was going to take us, but I knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. The next few days passed in a blur. Emily and I existed in the same house, but it was like living with a stranger. We spoke only when necessary, and even then, the conversations were short and cold. She kept to herself, and I found every excuse to stay out of the house. Work, the gym, even just going for long drives with no destination in mind. It was better than being in that tense, suffocating silence. I couldn't stop thinking about what to do. Should I stay and try to work things out, or should I just walk away? My mind bounced between the two constantly. Part of me wanted to fix things, because that's what you do when you build a life with someone. But the other part of me kept replaying that message from Mark. Those words, "Can't stop thinking about last night." Every time they echoed in my mind, it felt like being punched in the gut all over again. Emily was trying, I could see that. She had deleted Mark's contact info, blocked him on social media, and stopped mentioning him completely. She even suggested we start counseling. But I wasn't ready for that. How could I sit in a room with her and pretend we were both equally invested in fixing things when I didn't even know what I wanted anymore? One night, after another long day of avoiding her, I found myself sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. I wasn't watching anything, just flipping through channels trying to distract myself. Emily walked into the living room, and I could feel her standing behind me. After a few seconds of awkward silence, she finally spoke. "John, can we talk?" Her voice was quiet, almost pleading. I sighed and turned off the TV, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. "What is it?" She sat down on the edge of the couch, keeping a cautious distance. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've broken your trust, and I can't even begin to explain how sorry I am. But I need to know, do you want to work through this? Do you still want to be with me?" Her question hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been so focused on the betrayal, on the anger, that I hadn't really asked myself what I wanted. Did I still want to be with her? Did I still love her? Or was I just holding on to the idea of what we used to have? I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can get past this, Emily. Every time I look at you, I see him. I see the lies. And I don't know how to stop feeling that way. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting nervously. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or maybe even at all. But I need you to know that I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that to you. I stared at her, feeling the weight of her words but not knowing how to respond. Do you even know why you did it? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Why him? Why now? Emily took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears again. I don't know if I can explain it. I guess I felt disconnected, like we were drifting apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. Mark was there. He was easy to talk to, and I got caught up in it. But I never stopped loving you. I made a terrible mistake. I shook my head, feeling a surge of anger. A mistake? Emily, you didn't just trip and fall into an affair. You made a choice. Over and over again, you chose him. You lied to me for months, and now you're calling it a mistake. She winced at my words, but she didn't argue. You're right, she said softly. It was a choice. A horrible, selfish choice. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm asking for it anyway, because I don't want to lose you. I stood up, pacing around the room, trying to sort through the storm of emotions swirling inside me. How am I supposed to trust you again? How am I supposed to believe that this won't happen again the next time things get tough? Emily wiped at her tears, her voice shaking as she replied, I don't expect you to trust me right away, but I'm willing to work for it. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust back, even if it takes years. I'll go to counseling alone if you're not ready to go together. I'll do whatever you need. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she really was willing to change. Maybe we could fix this. But as soon as that thought crossed my mind, the doubt crept back in. Could I ever really look at her the same way? Could I ever stop seeing the betrayal in her eyes? I stopped pacing and turned to face her, the weight of the decision crushing down on me. I need more time, I said, my voice cracking. I can't make this decision right now. Emily nodded, her eyes full of sadness but also understanding. I'll wait as long as you need. As she walked out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts, I realized that no matter what decision I made, life as I knew it was over. The marriage we once had was gone, and the future felt like a vast, empty space full of uncertainty. I wasn't sure where we would go from here, or if we'd go anywhere at all. The days dragged on, filled with an unbearable tension that felt like it might suffocate me at any moment. Emily was doing everything she could to show me she was committed to fixing things, cooking my favorite meals, asking how my day was, even suggesting we take a weekend trip together. But every gesture felt hollow. It was like she was trying to patch up a sinking ship with Band-Aids. I went through the motions, trying to act normal, but I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that things were broken beyond repair. No matter how hard she tried, I couldn't forget the messages, the lies, the betrayal. I couldn't forget how she had smiled at me while living a double life. I found myself avoiding her more and more, leaving for work earlier and coming home later. When I was at home, I'd retreat to the spare room or zone out in front of the TV. The silence between us grew louder, but neither of us wanted to acknowledge it. One evening, about 2 weeks after our last serious conversation, Emily approached me again. This time, there was no pretense, no hopeful smile, just exhaustion and desperation in her eyes. John, we can't keep going on like this, she said, sitting across from me at the dinner table. Her voice was quiet but steady. I can feel you pulling away more every day. And I get it. I really do. But I need to know, are we going to try to fix this? Or are we just prolonging the inevitable? I didn't look up at her immediately. I just stared at my plate, feeling the weight of her question pressing down on me. I had been avoiding this moment, hoping that time would somehow make the decision for me, but it was clear now that I couldn't run from it any longer. Finally, I looked up, meeting her gaze. I don't know, I said, my voice low but honest. I want to believe we can fix this, but I don't know if I can get past what happened. Emily's face fell, but she nodded, her hands clasped tightly together on the table. I understand. I've been thinking a lot too, and I know that I'm the one who caused all of this. But I need to know if there's any part of you that still wants to fight for us. Her question hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to answer. Did I still want to fight? Did I still love her enough to put in the effort? I thought back to the early years of our marriage, to the love we shared, to all the moments we had built together. I had always believed we would make it through anything, but now it felt like we were standing on the edge of a cliff, one wrong move from falling into the abyss. I want to fix this, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. But I'm not sure if I can. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. I know I've broken your heart, John, and I hate myself for what I've done. I've been trying to show you that I'm committed to fixing this, but if you can't forgive me, if you can't even begin to trust me again, then I don't know what else I can do. Her words hit me hard. I could see the pain in her eyes, the regret. She wasn't just asking for my forgiveness. She was asking for hope. But could I give her that? Could I really let go of the anger and betrayal that had consumed me? I stood up, pacing around the room as my thoughts raced. I keep asking myself how we got here. I said, my frustration finally spilling over. How did we go from being so close to this? Was it my fault? Was I not enough for you? No, Emily cried, standing up to face me. This isn't your fault, John. I was selfish. I let my own insecurities and feelings of loneliness drive me to make the worst decision of my life. But I never stopped loving you. I need you to believe that. I shook my head, the anger rising inside me again. You say you love me, but you didn't stop to think about me when you were with him. How can I believe that your love means anything when you've already destroyed the trust we had? Emily's face crumpled, and she sank back into her chair. I know you don't believe me, and I don't blame you. But I'm still here, fighting for us. I'm not giving up on you, even if you've given up on me. Her words lingered, and I felt a wave of guilt crash over me. She was trying. She was doing everything she could to make things right. But no matter how hard she tried, I couldn't shake the darkness inside me. I need more time, I said again, though it felt like the 100th time I'd said it. I can't just flip a switch and pretend everything's okay. Emily nodded, her shoulders slumping. Take all the time you need, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But please, don't shut me out completely. That night, after our conversation, I lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling. I kept wondering if I was dragging things out, if I was just delaying the inevitable. Every day I stayed, I felt more confused, more lost. But leaving? Leaving meant giving up on everything we had built. It meant walking away from the life we had created together. And despite everything, there was still a part of me that couldn't let go of that life, even if it was crumbling. I wasn't sure if staying was the right decision, but leaving still felt impossible. For now, all I could do was wait and hope that the answers would come. A few more weeks passed, and while things weren't getting better, they also weren't getting worse. Emily continued trying small gestures, asking me about my day, trying to engage with me, but I could still feel the tension between us. Every conversation felt like we were tiptoeing around a minefield, avoiding the real issue that lay beneath the surface. I kept telling myself I needed more time, but how much time could I take before it became clear that this wasn't going to work? The uncertainty was suffocating. One evening, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, staring blankly at my phone. I had just come back from a long walk, trying to clear my head. Emily was in the kitchen, probably hoping I'd come in and talk to her, but I couldn't. Not yet. That's when my phone buzzed. It was an old friend, Mike, asking if I wanted to grab a drink. Normally, I'd decline, but tonight, I needed an escape. I needed someone who wasn't involved in all of this mess to talk to give me some perspective. I grabbed my keys, told Emily I was going out, and headed to the bar. When I arrived, Mike was already sitting at the bar, nursing a beer. We hadn't spoken much in the last few months, and I hadn't told him anything about what was happening with Emily. I wasn't sure I was ready to, but I needed to talk to someone. Hey man, Mike said as I sat down. Long time no see. How have you been? I gave a half-hearted shrug. Could be better. He raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of his drink. That bad, huh? What's going on? I hesitated for a moment, then decided to just rip the bandage off. Emily cheated on me. Mike's eyes widened in shock. No way. Are you serious? Yeah, I said, feeling the weight of the confession settle over me. It's been a couple of months now. I confronted her, she admitted it, and now, I don't know what to do. Mike shook his head, letting out a low whistle. Man, I'm sorry. That's brutal. How are you holding up? I sighed, taking a long sip of my beer before answering. I don't know. She says she's sorry, that she wants to fix things, but I can't shake the feeling that things will never be the same. I keep thinking about it, about how she betrayed me, and it just makes me angry all over again. Mike nodded, his expression serious. I can't even imagine what that's like. But let me ask you this. Do you still love her? The question hit me harder than I expected. Did I still love Emily? The answer should have been simple, but it wasn't. I loved the woman I had married, the woman I had built a life with. But now, after everything? I don't know. I admitted, my voice heavy. I think a part of me still does. But I'm not sure if that's enough anymore. Mike leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Look, man, no one can make this decision for you. But if there's even a chance that you two can work through this, you've got to decide if you're willing to put in the effort. If not, then maybe it's time to cut your losses and move on. But you can't keep living in limbo forever. I knew he was right. Living in this state of uncertainty was tearing me apart. I needed to make a decision, one way or another. But how could I make such a life-changing choice when I didn't even know how I felt? We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. I appreciated Mike's honesty. He wasn't sugarcoating anything, and that was exactly what I needed. After a couple of drinks, I thanked Mike and headed home. The drive was quiet, my mind racing as I replayed everything in my head. His words kept echoing. Do you still love her? And I knew I had to face that question head-on. When I got home, the house was dark except for the soft glow of the kitchen light. Emily was sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes searching mine, probably wondering if tonight would be the night we finally talked. I stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to keep avoiding the conversation, but another part, the part that still remembered the good in us, knew that I couldn't keep running from this. Emily, I said softly, walking over to the table. She looked up, her expression cautious but hopeful. We need to talk. She nodded, setting her mug down. Okay, she whispered. I've been waiting for this. I sat down across from her, my hands clasped in front of me as I tried to find the right words. I've been thinking a lot. About us. About everything. She nodded again, her eyes filled with worry. And I don't know if we can fix this, I admitted, my voice heavy with the weight of the truth. But I think I still want to try. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, there was a glimmer of hope in them. You do? I nodded, feeling the knots in my chest loosen just a little. Yeah, but I'm not going to lie, Emily. This isn't going to be easy. I'm still angry, I'm still hurt, and I don't know how long it'll take for me to move past that, if I even can. But I think I'm willing to give us a chance. The relief on her face was palpable. She reached across the table, her hand trembling as she took mine. Thank you, she whispered, her voice cracking. I'll do whatever it takes, John. I'll do anything to make this right. I squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of the decision settle over both of us. This was just the first step, and the road ahead was long and uncertain. But for the first time in months, I felt like there was at least a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to rebuild what had been broken. Deciding to give us a chance was one thing, but actually doing it was another. The next few days after that conversation were a strange mix of tension and cautious hope. Emily tried her best to give me space, but I could see how eager she was to make things right. She kept asking me if I wanted to talk, and while I appreciated her efforts, I still needed time to process everything. One of the first steps we took was finding a therapist. Emily had suggested couples counseling weeks ago, but I hadn't been ready. Now, if we were going to have any shot at rebuilding what was left of our marriage, I knew it had to start with us being completely honest with each other, and that meant therapy. We found a counselor, Dr. Cohen, who came highly recommended. Emily booked the first session, and I went along, feeling a mixture of dread and anxiety. The idea of sitting in a room and spilling out all my anger and pain to a stranger wasn't exactly appealing, but I knew we couldn't avoid it any longer. When we arrived, Dr. Cohen welcomed us into her office, a quiet, comfortable space with soft lighting and overstuffed chairs. She had a calm presence about her, which immediately put me somewhat at ease. We sat down, and after the introductions, she didn't waste any time diving into the heart of the matter. "So, John, Emily," she began, her voice gentle but firm, "you've both made the decision to try to repair your relationship. That's a big step, but I'm sure there's a lot of hurt and mistrust still lingering. Let's start by talking about where you both are right now." I glanced over at Emily, who was sitting with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked nervous, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. I took a deep breath, deciding to go first. "I'm angry," I admitted, my voice tight. "I'm hurt, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust her again. But I don't want to throw away 10 years of marriage. I'm willing to try, but I don't know where this will go." Dr. Cohen nodded thoughtfully, her eyes moving between us. "That's completely understandable, John. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and once it's broken, it takes time to rebuild. Emily, what about you? How are you feeling right now?" Emily looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper when she spoke. "I feel guilty every day. I hate what I did, and I know I've hurt him in ways I can't even imagine. I don't expect him to forgive me right away, or maybe ever, but I want to show him that I'm committed to earning back his trust." I sat there listening to her, and for the first time, I realized just how much guilt she was carrying. It didn't make the betrayal hurt any less, but seeing her so vulnerable reminded me that she was human too. She wasn't perfect, and maybe she really was trying her best to make amends. Dr. Cohen leaned forward, her hands folded in her lap. "The fact that you're both here, willing to have these conversations, is a good sign. But rebuilding trust takes time, patience, and a lot of honest communication. That means acknowledging the pain, but also understanding why the betrayal happened in the first place." Emily's eyes flickered to me, and I could tell she was bracing herself for what was coming next. "John, would you like to talk about how the betrayal has affected you?" I swallowed hard, feeling the familiar knot in my chest tighten. "It's not just the fact that she cheated," I began, my voice heavy. "It's that she lied. She pretended everything was fine, made me feel like I was crazy for suspecting anything. I feel like I was the last person to know what was happening in my own marriage." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. She just listened, her face etched with regret. Dr. Cohen nodded again, her expression sympathetic. "That's a very valid feeling, John. When someone we trust deceives us, it shakes the very foundation of our relationship. Emily, I think it would help if you could explain why this happened. Why did you seek out something with Mark?" Emily took a deep, shaky breath, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she said quietly. "I know that sounds like a cop-out, but it's the truth. I was feeling disconnected from John, from our relationship. We were drifting apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. Mark was there. He listened, and I got caught up in it. But I never stopped loving John." I sat there, listening to her explanation, and while part of me wanted to scream that it wasn't enough, another part of me felt a strange sense of clarity. I had known for a while that things between us had been off, but I had ignored it. We had both let the distance grow without really addressing it, and that had opened the door for this to happen. It didn't excuse what she did, but it did help me understand how we got here. The session continued with more questions, more digging into our feelings, and by the end, I was emotionally drained. But I also felt a tiny flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going for now. As we left the therapist's office, Emily reached for my hand, hesitating for a moment as if she wasn't sure if I'd let her. I looked down at her, and for the first time in what felt like months, I didn't pull away. I let her hand rest in mine, and we walked to the car in silence, both of us processing what had just happened. The road ahead was still uncertain. There were no guarantees that therapy would save us, no promises that I'd ever be able to forgive her completely. But for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward. When we got home, Emily turned to me at the door, her eyes still red from crying. Thank you, she whispered, for trying. I know it's hard, but it means everything to me. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm. It's going to take time, Emily. A lot of time, but we'll see where this goes. She smiled weakly, and for the first time in months, it felt like we were standing on the same ground, both of us looking toward a future that, while uncertain, wasn't completely lost. Months passed, and things between Emily and I began to slowly shift. The therapy sessions were hard. There were tears, raised voices, and moments where I wasn't sure we could go on. But each time, we left the counselor's office with a little more understanding and, surprisingly, a little more hope. It wasn't easy. Some days, I'd wake up still angry, still hurt, and the memories of her affair would flood back, hitting me like a wave. But other days, I felt a little lighter, like maybe we could move past this. I was learning that healing wasn't a straight path. It was full of setbacks, days when I didn't want to see her face, followed by days when I caught a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Emily was patient through it all. She didn't rush me, didn't push me to forgive her or move on quicker than I was ready. She was committed to rebuilding the trust she had shattered, even when it seemed impossible. She cut all ties with Mark, and I could see how much effort she was putting into showing me she was serious about us. The therapy sessions helped us understand where we had gone wrong, how we had drifted apart and let the distance between us grow without addressing it. But they also helped us learn how to communicate better, how to talk about the things that scared us, instead of bottling them up until they exploded. One night after one of our sessions, we sat in the living room, both of us feeling emotionally drained. I looked over at Emily, who was sitting quietly, her legs tucked under her, staring at the floor. I don't know how we're going to do this, I said softly, breaking the silence. But I'm glad we're trying. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with the same vulnerability I had seen in the therapist's office. Me too, she whispered. I know it's hard, John. I know it's going to take time. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Her words hit me differently that night. For the first time in a long while, I didn't just hear the guilt in her voice. I heard the love. The love she had for me. The love she had been trying to show in the months since the affair came to light. I believe you, I said, surprising even myself. Her eyes widened slightly, and she gave a small, tentative smile. You do? I nodded. Yeah, I do. It's not going to be easy, and I'm not saying I've fully forgiven you yet, but I believe you when you say you're committed to us. She reached out, hesitantly placing her hand on mine. For the first time in months, I didn't flinch or pull away. I let her hand stay there, and after a few moments, I squeezed it gently. That moment was small, but it felt like a turning point. It was the first real step toward healing, not just individually, but together. In the weeks that followed, we kept working at it. Slowly, we began to rediscover each other, finding ways to reconnect that didn't feel forced or unnatural. We started having dinner together again, talking about our days, sharing moments of our lives that we had neglected for so long. We went for walks, spent time watching our favorite shows, and gradually, things started to feel less tense, more familiar. I'm not going to lie, there were still days when I struggled. The betrayal wasn't something I could just forget. But over time, I realized that while the memory of her affair would always be there, it didn't have to define us. It didn't have to be the thing that broke us for good. One night, a few months after we started therapy, Emily and I decided to take a weekend trip to the mountains. The same trip I had suggested months before, back when things first started to fall apart. It felt like we were finally ready for it, like we had earned this break after all the hard work we'd been doing. We rented a cabin far away from the noise of the city and spent the weekend hiking, sitting by the fire and talking, really talking. For the first time in what felt like forever, we didn't just talk about the affair or our problems. We talked about our dreams, our future, the things that had brought us together in the first place. On our last night there, as we sat outside under the stars, Emily turned to me, her face soft in the glow of the firelight. John, do you think we'll be okay? I looked at her, thinking about everything we'd been through, the pain, the anger, the doubt, but also the moments of hope, the small victories, the steps we had taken toward healing. I don't know what the future holds, I said honestly, but I think we're going to be okay. We're not the same people we were before all this happened, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we're stronger now. She smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I hope so. We sat in silence for a while, just holding hands and looking at the stars. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because we were still here, still trying, still fighting for what we had. I didn't know if we'd ever fully heal from what had happened, but I knew one thing for sure. We weren't giving up. And in the end, that was what mattered most. That's the end of the story. Thank you very much for watching. If you are interested in something, leave a comment under the video, like it, and subscribe to the channel so that you don't lose it. New videos every day.